And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska aviation weather outlook on this Monday, March 3rd, 2025. And setting things up here as we head into Tuesday and the midweek period. This outlook is for Tuesday and Wednesday. By Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, we're going to have a low coming in off the Bering with more moisture pulling up along the west coast. Also a secondary low development southeast of the Alaska Peninsula will also spread precipitation up along the western Gulf, including the eastern Kenai to around Prince William Sound as we head through late Tuesday night and especially during the day on Wednesday. In advance of all this, we have generally moisture along the west coast creating IFR conditions, some lower ceilings, visibility in some precipitation, mainly light to pockets of moderate snow. Even could be a little mixed precipitation, some rain or a little bit of sleet or freezing rain mixed in areas of the western interior, especially as you get inland from Bristol Bay and up along the Yukon River. But as we go through Tuesday morning, we find most of the IFR conditions along the west coast and then up into areas of the southwestern Gulf around Kodiak Island and the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. By Tuesday afternoon, we find still IFR conditions along much of the west coast, the YK Delta, St. Lawrence, on up through the Seward Peninsula and all the way up there north of Cape Lisburne out over the Chukchi Sea. Also, some IFR conditions, Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai down to along the entrance of Cook Inlet, east side of Kodiak Island. And then there's another low pressure system and frontal system that's going to be heading northeastward toward the west coast. So again, a band of IFR conditions associated with that. And by the time we get into Wednesday morning, with that low here in the lower portion of the Bering Sea pulling up toward the west coast, widespread IFR conditions along areas of the Chukchi Sea coast, especially from around Point Lay southward through the Bering Strait, down along the YK Deltas and into Bristol Bay. And then with secondary development, we have a low out here pushing up toward the southwest Gulf with more precipitation. So we find IFR conditions there at Kodiak Island all along this northwest area of the Gulf, including Prince William Sound, the east side of the Kenai, and then also with that east-southeast flow ahead of it up along the southward and eastward facing slopes of the Alaska Range. By Wednesday afternoon, we find IFR conditions along the northern Gulf Coast, again, including the eastern Kenai, Prince William Sound to Yakutat, as well as up along the west arm of the Alaska Range where you have the east and southeastward facing slopes. Still IFR conditions up there along areas of the Chukchi Sea coastline through the Bering Strait down through St. Lawrence and St. Matthew. Pass conditions, though, on Tuesday for Anaktuvuk Pass should generally be VFR there in the east central Brooks Range at Anaktuvuk and Adigan passes. As we get down toward that west arm of the Alaska Range, we'll start out with VFR early on Tuesday, giving way to MVFR conditions, and eventually that will lead toward IFR conditions, Lake Clark and Merrill, by Tuesday night into Wednesday. Rainy Pass, also VFR conditions to start Tuesday morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. Windy Pass should be able to hold on to VFR conditions during the day on Tuesday. And areas further eastward along the Alaska Range, Isabel and Metasta Passes, we expect VFR conditions there on Tuesday. Dropping down across the Copper River Basin, VFR conditions at Tanita Pass. And at least early on Portage Pass, we should see VFR conditions in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions as that moisture comes up from the southwest. And then Chilkoot and White, we'll see VFR conditions there across the northern panhandle on Tuesday. Freezing levels, at least starting out, surface freezing line Tuesday morning is dipped down into the lower Bering Sea, into the eastern Aleutians and far lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula. Coming back up because we have this troughiness out here over the west with a flow bringing in slightly milder air northward, so the freezing line runs up into the southwest interior, up to the lower Yukon River, and then back down across Cook Inlet and along the Gulf Coast into the inner channels of the Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft are not all that impressive. We do have some freezing levels above 4,000 feet down in the southeast lower quadrant of the Gulf, well west of the Alaska Panhandle, the southeast Panhandle. And aside from that, as we look at where we have most of the precipitation, or at least clouds that are going to have supercooled water droplets of reasonable levels, that we have the best chance for moderate icing Up there along the area, Utqiagvik to Point Lay, generally above 3,000 feet. There's a pocket around the east side there of Kotzebue Sound, about 4,000 feet, and then again out over the lower southwest Gulf, just off the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, up into the southwest interior, just west of the Alaska Range as you get up into the middle upper part of the Kuskokwim River area, and then back out here along the lower Bering Sea, tip of the Alaska Peninsula, back toward the eastern and central Aleutians with that low in front. We do expect some moderate icing above 4,000 feet there. Upper level jet stream winds, we do have a jet core to 135 knots south of the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula in the North Pacific. Otherwise, a rather broad southwesterly flow across the mainland, as high as 75 knots just west there of Bristol Bay, and then coming up into areas of the Susitna Valley at 65 knots. At 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, generally a southerly flow. That's why we've had milder temperatures, especially through south central and the east portion of the mainland. There's a core of stronger winds along and south of the Alaska Peninsula into the North Pacific, 45 to 60 knots. And then at 3,000 feet, we find with that frontal system in low that's back here out toward the western Aleutians on the north side of it, easterly flow, and ahead of it, south flow, just south of the Alaska Peninsula to 60 knots. Across the at least the Gulf of Alaska, winds are out of the southeast at around 30 to 35 knots, and it's this upslope flow along this west arm of the Alaska Range, which will have a tendency to increase MVFR, then IFR conditions as we go into Tuesday night and on Wednesday. So for Tuesday, turbulence along this boundary that's approaching from the south and west. We do expect areas of moderate turbulence along the western Gulf, including Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, down through Shelikof Strait, the Alaska Peninsula, especially the northern part, and up there Lake Iliamna, inland as you get into the middle upper Kuskokwim Valley, extending up to the southwest end there of the Brooks Range. And then we have some pockets of moderate turbulence there at the Lisburn Peninsula, at Point Hope and Cape Lisburn, north side of the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, and then pulling back toward the south and west here along the Aleutian chain, we do find areas of isolated to considerable moderate turbulence surface to 3,000 feet expected on Tuesday.